Hunter x Hunter is an absolute joy to consume. And of all the aspects of storytelling it excels at, its world building and character writing are second to none. As fantastical as the world of Hunter x Hunter is, brimming with creativity and intrigue, the narrative is grounded through its nuanced human characters. Characters that operate within a moral gray indicative of the extreme conditions they often persist in. The same moral parameters Hunter x Hunter's primary protagonist, Gon, operates in, but for different reasons. Gon is intentionally written to be a misleading character to a certain degree, one who ostensibly possesses all of the standard personality traits expected of a shonen protagonist, but the complexity underlying Gon's character is established through the deconstruction of these same tropes. As overused and meaningless as this phrase has become, I cannot stress how successfully Hunter x Hunter subverts audience expectations. As someone who first watched it fairly deep into my anime journey, I had confidently mapped out this story's trajectory, about 10 episodes in, based on genre conventions ironed into my brain due to whatever deleterious genetic mutation requires me to voraciously consume this shit. Well, when Gon pushed his first Heaven's Arena opponent with enough force to send him airborne 20 yards into a wall, I kind of stopped guessing. The most common and straightforward method of deconstructing fictional tropes, and the one most relevant to Hunter x Hunter, takes the form of the question, how would this trope play out with real-world consequences applied to it? How would a boy with nary a role model, aside from Mito, who deserves massive props for stepping up at age 13 to take care of Gon because his deadbeat fucking father wanted to go restore some ruins or some shit, and access to immense power, while possessing the talent to wield it, react when the unfair and often cruel reality of the world is laid bare before him? A world he willingly throws himself into in order to find a father who, let's not mince words here, abandoned him. A fact Gon copes with through some Olympic level mental gymnastics, reasoning that being a hunter must have been important enough to justify his priority over parental obligations and family as a whole. Gon becomes a nearly pure product of his own nature due to this lack of guidance, and his nature is one of a fiercely loyal but wholly selfish and emotional 12-year-old boy lacking an understanding of traditional morality. The secondary lead for most of the show is Killua, who met Gon while they were both taking the hunter exam. Killua has had plenty of guidance, which would have perfectly served him had he any desire to become an assassin and carry on the family legacy. Where Gon is the sum total of every virtue and vice within him, given the space to flourish, uncontested, Killua is a product of meticulous nurture, administered with the terrifying precision expected from a family of assassins. The efficacy of these methods was not up for debate. Combined with his God-given natural ability, Killua excelled and was already an extremely capable killer at the point in his life he takes the hunter exam at. Out of boredom, he states, and where he meets Gon. Gon was the variable Killua's family never accounted for, providing him with a point of reference through which Killua saw how limited his childhood experiences had been due to his family's abuse and manipulation. As a result, he leaves the nest, his father confident he'll inevitably return because that's what he raised. One boy leaves due to his own nature and warped sense of morality, the other due to the twisted nurture his family forced upon him, and what he missed out on as a result. Both leave as either a direct or indirect result of their respective childhood experiences. We see the same significance placed on formative years in our other main characters during the first arc. Kurapika, whose entire clan was massacred by the notorious and extremely powerful criminal organization known as the Phantom Troop, in order to obtain their legendary Scarlet Eyes, the recovery of which is Kurapika's primary goal, along with the decimation of the Phantom Troop. And Leorio, who is introduced as a narcissist who insists he's driven by the pursuit of material excess, but come to find out, in truth, money is but a means to an end for him. Leorio wants to become a doctor, as costly an endeavor in the world of Hunter x Hunter as in our own, in order to work pro bono for those who cannot afford it. As his childhood friend, Pietro, died of an entirely curable illness they couldn't afford the surgery to treat. Wonderfully written characters that deserve their own videos. Mainly Kurapika, who has been the main character as much as a character can be in Hunter x Hunter, in 2 arcs, including the current one. But our focus today is going to remain on Gon, first and foremost. And by proxy, a lot of what is explored through Killua, the narrative themes of nature versus nurture, and the extreme variation in the way different people respond to trauma. Gon himself is the ultimate subversion of the prototypical shonen protagonist. Generally, in shonen, we're only shown the positive manifestations of the protagonist's personality traits. Stubbornness is portrayed as undying loyalty, greed is merely unbridled ambition, amorality becomes pragmatism, and so on and so forth. Gon checks all the same boxes, but Togashi chooses to put both ends of the spectrum, both virtuous and vicious manifestations of these attributes, on full display, not shying away from the ugliest aspects of human depravity, thereby forcing readers to confront this dichotomy within the boy, and by extension all of humanity. For all of Gon's amazing qualities, of which there are many, he is equal parts selfish, hypocritical, and amoral. Someone with Gon's mental makeup is capable of descending into some seriously dark places given the right set of circumstances. Circumstances the Chimera Ant arc, for example, presents in full. When Gon is forced to choose between bad and worse, he'll show you the absolute worst. Gon utilizes highly subjective reasoning to interpret the world around him. And while his natural disposition is mostly positive, his strong biases can drive him to make some shockingly self-destructive and short-sighted decisions. I must reiterate that Gon is 12 years old and tends to view the world in a fairly simplistic, straightforward manner, which is not at all effective for evaluating people possessing the kind of depth Togashi imbues his characters with. Gon's black and white perception renders him unable to recognize and resultingly unable to consider the abundance of nuance that essentially defines the human experience, and not black and white perception in a moralistic right or wrong sense. Black and white based on whether or not the situation or individual in question is enjoyable or beneficial to Gon. If someone is opposing him, or God forbid is an active threat to he or his party, Gon will kill and not think twice about it. He's not bloodthirsty or inclined to commit violent acts by default, but it's the way he mentally processes these violent events when they do occur that is most telling. In the Hunter exam, I feel we're shown glimpses of Gon's cold indifference to life he has no personal stake in, as countless participants die grisly deaths right in front of our party, and Gon is completely unfazed. In his mind, this is within the acceptable range of outcomes as willing participants to a lethal examination process. I can't imagine he'd show the same callous indifference regardless of personal liability if Killua, Kurapika, or Leorio were amongst the exam victims. When Killua snaps and murders an exam participant out of turn, causing him to be disqualified, Gon's biases are just as present in terms of how he interprets the events. He insists Killua was manipulated by Illumi and can't be held accountable as a result. And although he's kind of right in this case, the ability to critically weigh in on the matter is not at all there.
Hisoka, an eccentric, murderous clown man who is sexually aroused by the prospect of power and its potential, is all in all viewed pretty neutrally by Gon. If anything, God almost treats him as a benchmark or adversary existing to push him and force the development of his physical and combat prowess during the events of Hunter x Hunter's second arc, the Heaven's Arena arc. A very 12-year-old way to view an individual that would kill him without a second thought if Gon ever ceases to entertain. As far as Gon sees it, he became a lot stronger on his quest to rock Hisoka's shit, and he established a level of mutual respect sufficient to return the badge. Again, this hyper-violent maniac who openly admits to his murderous indulgences. That's the guy we're talking about. Fuck. Before Jing officially began his 12-year-long search for some milk, he developed what can only be described as a Nin-based video game, one requiring Nin to access and play, along with the PlayStation. Well, I think it was called like a Joy Station, I think, but it's a fucking PlayStation. All right, we all know it's a goddamn PlayStation. PS1. Upon booting the PS1 up and meeting the aforementioned requirement, the player is teleported to a physical island where the game world is hosted. Gon and Killua arrive to a lawless land where players wantonly murder each other for specified slot cards, as completing a set of 100 is the requirement for beating this particular game. Now, in light of this discovery, one would expect the average shonen protagonist's outrage to stem from the blatant disregard for human life over what will amount simply to cash for the party that succeeds, as the true prize for beating the game, taking 3 restricted slot card items outside the boundaries of the game world, has been reserved for the wealthy benefactors funding each group's foray into the game. Gon seems pretty unbothered by the murderers themselves, instead taking greater issue with the fact players are not engaging with the game his father created the way he intended. This one moment in of itself encapsulates how heavily Gon weighs his personal feelings about an issue over the objective ethical reality, which he gives no fucks for. Evidence abounds in the Greed Island arc as Togashi continues planting the seeds for Gon's descent following the events of York New City. In the fight between Gon and Ginthru, the main antagonist of the Greed Island arc, we see how this mentality can become self-destructive very, very quickly. In a shocking moment, Gon decides to tank a concentrated fucking bomb blast on his wrist/hand area, completely blowing the goddamn thing off just so he could execute a plan formulated on the fly simply for the satisfaction of doing so against an opponent objectively more powerful than he, in just the thrill of battle that Gon seems to fucking live for. Ginthru manages to avoid the attack through sheer dumb luck, just tripping on a rock right before Gon's Jajankin landed, and his initial reaction more or less mirrors the audience's, or at least mine, as he simply stands in shock of Gon's complete disregard for his physical well-being, declaring him an abject lunatic. Gon's opponents in Heaven's Arena saw glimpses of this insane tunnel vision, as Gon took some pretty crazy risks there as well while experiencing combat's intoxicating adrenaline. But the greater the stakes, the more short-sighted and reckless Gon seemingly becomes, as we see this vice pushed to its absolute limit in the Chimera Ant arc, Hunter x Hunter's magnum opus. Gon really has no concept of established ethical standards, as ethics are dependent on others or outside sources for definition. One's morality transcends cultural norms, though. But I wouldn't rely on Gon's moral compass to get you home. Switching focus from Gon for a bit, let's look at the York New City arc a little more in depth. Kurapika's quest, and the introduction of the Phantom Troop. This arc shifts the overall focus to Kurapika, and we see the extreme lengths he's gone to in order to seek power enough for his retribution. Kurapika is deep into his quest for vengeance by the events of York New, having acquired his nin abilities for the sole purpose of exacting revenge on the Phantom Troop, referred to simply as the Spiders. Kurapika's Hatsu's being Hunter x Hunter's take on special abilities unique to each and end user, like Gon's Jarjankin previously mentioned. Kurapika's Hatsu is a set of 5 chains. There's plenty of symbolism surrounding Kurapika's chains, but I think the most poignant is based on his own stated goal, that there are people at large who need to be chained to hell. Obviously, he considers himself up to the task. These chains represent the inevitable judgment the spiders must face for their sins. Sins certainly heinous enough to meet the Christian criteria for eternal damnation, and extremely lax criteria to be fair. And Kurapika has deemed himself judge, jury, and executioner, fueled by righteous anger. But can we really call his end goal righteous? Can Kurapika's revenge be justified? Or is he perpetuating a cycle of violence, loss to hatred? No different than the Phantom Troop in more ways than one. The chains can be interpreted as bindings for Kurapika himself, who willingly bound himself to his own despair and rage, throwing away freedom as a sacrifice for this bloody ritual. At the end of the day, revenge is but a confession of pain, and I think that holds true for Kurapika as well. We haven't had nearly as much of the narrative dedicated to Leorio, a damn shame to say the least. But as we briefly mentioned earlier, he can also be seen as acting in response to childhood trauma. Although Leorio has the healthiest response by far amongst the main characters, ironic given his outward demeanor. In fact, we're shown a wide spectrum of emotional responses to childhood trauma, and it's all wonderfully written and thematically relevant. But for Killua, Kurapika, and Leorio, the associated events take place off-screen, the narrative only showing glimpses through personal recounts and flashbacks. As for Gon, he manages to avoid grappling with true loss throughout a large duration of the story, but when things do eventually fall apart, Gon shows us the extreme end of this spectrum, reacting in a way that is equal parts childish, selfish, tragic, and more than anything, human. So, I don't think the maturation process can be forced or expedited really at all. Barring rare exceptions, real world scenarios where adolescents are forced to fulfill adult roles in society often end in disaster and can have severe negative repercussions for the youth involved. With extensive underground networks coordinating the human trafficking of minors at a public site, or major corporations brazenly utilizing child labor to harvest raw materials in plain sight, the common denominator is the harm done to these youth. I think the Chimera Ant arc is the juggernaut that dives deepest into this depravity. But if there's one broader theme that best encapsulates the arc, it's that good and evil are both essential parts of sentient life as we know it. Someone like Gon, who at times acts simply as an avatar for his own uncontrolled emotion, is at great risk of succumbing to despair, or an overwhelmingly negative impulse he may feel in the moment. And when Gon's unbridled optimism and irrational positivity utterly fail him in the face of all-encompassing loss, he submits to the demon that's been poking its head out all series long. We'll eventually go over the climax of this arc, but the reason Gon's decline hits so hard and we aren't dealing with a Game of Thrones Season 8 Daenerys situation is because this development is the culmination of many signs, character observations, and outright foreshadowing definitely established prior by Togashi. The narrative legwork needed to properly set up this deficiency in Gon's character and aptitude for a hard-headed ruthlessness was established long before the Chimera Ant threat came into focus. In light of his history and the instances outlined in this video, it makes sense that the stakes of the Chimera Ant situation would force an extreme response from not only Gon, but really the entire Hunter Association, evidenced by the presence of Netero, who, along with Nove and Morel, represent more or less the full extent of the association's retaliatory force. People have mentioned the significance of Gon's reaction to his first kill, or lack thereof, as well as his thinly veiled threat aimed at Meleron fucking what? Meleron? I'm really not sure how to pronounce that. It's saying that if Meleron's lying, things actually become a lot more simple because then Gon would simply kill him without remorse then and there. It's cold. The moment that provided me with the most insight into this aspect of Gon's character is actually one of the most scrutinized episodes of this arc. The first encounter with Batu and Kite's death. This episode is brilliant on so many levels, but I want to focus on Gon's reaction when Batu confronts them, taking Kite's arm off on the way over for good measure. In a matter of seconds, having had just enough time to fully comprehend the enormity of Batu's power, Gon chooses to throw it all away. His aura manifests, intent on rushing Batu head on, until who else but Killua has the gut reaction to incapacitate him, carry his unconscious body, and immediately retreat to Kite's great relief. Gon understood what was before him. I know he wasn't exactly level-headed in the moment, but he was in the frame with Killua when Batu flexes her aura and definitely got a read on her. It just wasn't registered, or was, and was intentionally disregarded. Simply put, if Killua isn't present to do what he did, maybe because, I don't know, Gon tells him to fuck off or something, Gon dies right there. This one scene within a much larger sequence that has its primary focus elsewhere foreshadows the inevitable confrontation between Gon and Batu, minus the additional variables present the second time, and lays even more foundation supporting the logical consistency behind Gon's self-destruction. One of the few critical points against the 2011 Hunter x Hunter adaptation that I completely agree with is the absence of the kite scene present in the first chapter of the manga. We're shown all the way back in chapter 1 how Kite saved Gon's life from a large fox-like bear creature called a Kitsumeguma when they first met on Bell Island. After physically reprimanding Gon for ignoring the territorial markers left by the Kitsune, he begins scolding the boy, asking how his parents could have failed to teach him this, considering where they live, which is when Gon reveals that he's an orphan, immediately garnering sympathy from the soft-hearted Kite, who gives him some ointment for his broken skin. Immediately garnering some sympathy from Kite. It's when Gon refuses to allow the Kitsune cub to be killed, holding on tight despite the wounds he's suffering as the cub retaliates, that Kite makes the connection. Through Gon's eyes and his overall behavior and demeanor, Kite puts the pieces together and realizes Gon is the boy Jing left on the Whale Island all those years ago. He informs Gon that Jing was the one who taught him how to be a hunter, and that had they never met, he'd probably still be struggling on the streets and may even be dead. God damn. Kite assures him that Jing is very much alive. In fact, the final test Jing imposed on Kite was to simply find him. A hunt he admits has been far more difficult than anything he's previously undertaken. Before departing,
Kite shares with Gon that he sees the qualities of a great hunter within him.
none more apparent than the love animals have for him. Through Kite, Gon receives what is undoubtedly the most impactful information of his entire life, and the ripple effect sets the entire story into motion. Kite is the closest to Jing Gon's ever been, and when they meet again, Gon feels compelled to prove his worthiness, worthy of being noticed by his own father. By skipping this scene in the 2011 anime, Kite's introduction can feel like a decision made to retroactively flesh out the Jing plot thread and yank some emotional investment out of Gon for the upcoming arc, rather than the meticulously planned reintroduction that it actually is. But I digress. Opposite to Gon's emotional development, we have Killua. Gon and Killua have anti-parallel arcs in Hunter x Hunter, and things come to a head for the boys in this one. Killua, a boy introduced as a remorseless killer who indulged all the worst parts of his nature when he wanted, is probably the most selflessly motivated player in this arc. He is voluntarily throwing himself headfirst at an extinction level threat just to be by his friend's side in his lowest moment. The same way Gon was instinctively there for him during the Zoldyck family arc following Killua's disqualification from the Hunter exam. The most heartbreaking part, unlike the clear affection Killua showed to the party when they came to rescue him, threatening to kill Miluki if he caused him any harm, is that Gon ultimately shuts Killua out. The isolation seemed to start shortly after witnessing the grotesque marionette that remained of Kite's corpse, brought to life as a sparring dummy through Pitu's Nin. Although Gon leaves this encounter still believing Kite can be restored, this heavily fucks with his head. And from this point forward,
Gon shuts everyone and everything out.
singularly focused on finding Pitu and forcing cooperation. Killua knows this. He sees the distance between them and
Understands how little concern Gon has for his well-being during these events. But
despite all this, Killua presses on. Killua has found his humanity, and Gon is losing his right in front of him. And with all of this emotion hitting a boiling point, Gon and Killua reach Pitu, who is attempting to treat a very wounded and very innocent bystander caught in the ambush's crossfire. The victim is named Komugi, and for the sake of brevity, she is the most important person in the world to Miriam, the Chimera Ant King and the most powerful existential threat introduced into the series to this day. For this section's intents and purposes, all we need to know is that due to the King's orders, her safety is more important to Pitu than her own life. Well, Gon doesn't exactly apply critical thinking to this situation either. Shocker. He bursts through the door and gets straight to it, announcing only his name and his intentions, unloading his entire life's worth of rage and frustration in the process. Pitu doesn't even register his speech, solely focused on overcoming the situation and carrying out the King's orders. Gon demands Pitu fight and bring Kite back per his demands, but Pitu bore no malice in the moment, literally baring her open palms and leaving only a thin veil of aura around herself for protection, leaving Gon without any means to strike the hammer of his emotions, as the manga puts it. Killua makes one last effort to reach Gon's humanity, theorizing that Komugi was most likely an innocent bystander injured by their party's ambush. Killua basically says if Pitu really is healing her, and all signs are strongly suggesting she is, then they owe it to Komugi to allow her to finish the process. Gon just does not care, more or less saying he doesn't give a shit and that he's not about to bank on any uncertainties and place trust in this thing, as he puts it. Suddenly, Pitu breaks its own goddamn arm, offering the other one both legs and whatever else the boys want to provide them with any reassurance. Pitu states bluntly she's even fine with him destroying her entire damn body as long as it remains intact enough to control the inability responsible for healing Komugi, Dr. Blythe. The King's orders were very clear, and nothing else matters as Pitu pleads with Gon, ensuring full cooperation once the healing process is complete. As the once clearly defined line separating monsters and humans becomes imperceptible, this creature, responsible for seeding the hatred come to fruition in this moment, begs Gon to let her save the girl. Upon hearing this, Gon fucking loses it. Based on Gon's binary view of the world, this simply should not be possible. It doesn't compute. Pitu is a monster. An act of selflessness like this is not in their nature objectively. And in response to this seemingly impossible display, Gon runs the entire gamut of human emotion, stunned at what he just heard, which quickly gives way to confusion, then disbelief, culminating in pure, unadulterated rage. He's almost begging Pitu to give him something, professing how unfair the situation is and asking the ant how it could possibly be thinking of Komugi in that way after the horrible things Kite suffered at its hands. Seeing red, a powerful, sinister aura manifests around Gon as he prepares his judging and hell-bent on destroying everything in Pitu's general direction, until Killua finally gets through to him by clearly and calmly stating the obvious. Kite doesn't come back if Pitu dies here, and in one of the most human and most painful moments in the entire series, Gon hurts Killua with real intent. He tells Killua that it must be nice to be so collected, since it's really none of his business. Killua, the one who has been by Gon's side through countless life-threatening perils, who is willingly throwing himself at near certain death this very moment, all because his friend is hurting, and Gon totally shuts him out, as his emotions continue to perniciously consume him. As awful as Gon must have felt in that moment, I believe he wanted someone else to feel just as bad, as humans tend to do to those they love. The descent continues. To me, this is one of the many emotional climaxes present in this behemoth of an arc, and kind of a breaking point for Killua and Gon's relationship. Killua himself says after this ordeal is over, assuming they both survive, that he has to part ways with Gon. A realization that comes with immense pain, of course. How would you feel if your best friend essentially told you that the two of you weren't close enough to warrant your involvement in the most significant conflict of their life, minimizing the importance of your relationship with them? I've seen some claims that Gon was trying to create this emotional distance to physically distance from Killua in order to exclude him from what is ostensibly a suicide mission when looking at the massive chasm between Gon and Killua's combined power and Pitu's. But I really don't think that's the case. Firstly, it would imply Gon was aware of the reality behind Kite's current state, that he's a corpse being manipulated by some scary ass nin and is not coming back. Not in a form Gon is familiar with, at least. Wink, wink. From Gon's point of view, he just needs Pitu within close enough proximity to Kite to activate Dr. Blythe and reverse whatever damage she inflicted on him in the first place. In typical Gon fashion, he simplified Kite's restoration to a mere logistical problem, which is terrible news for poor Komugi. Secondly, I don't believe Gon has the kind of situational awareness or emotional maturity required to navigate the situation in that way, especially not as unhinged as he becomes upon reaching Pitu. Killua, on the other hand, displays pretty spot-on intuition throughout the entire palace invasion section of the arc. He put together the fact that Komugi's injury was due to his grandfather's dragon dive surprise attack, as well as predicting her existence and its significance. He concluded the king injuring himself had to do with Komugi. Killua knew that Gon would react horribly once he discovered what P2 was hypocritically trying to protect. Killua chose to stay with Melaron instead of immediately going back to Gon's side, which ends up saving Knuckles' life, another confidant on this mission. Killua could tell he was being watched and by someone he knew before his encounter with Palm. And finally, Killua was right to go back to Gon's side when he did as well, towards the end of the arc. My point being that Killua's internal dialogue is the most reliable interpretation of the ongoing events that we, the readers, are provided with, aside from, the narrator. Killua absolutely would have picked up on Gon's intentions had the underlying goal behind his cutting words been to isolate himself with Pitu. But I believe Gon was simply hurting, and in a horribly misguided and emotionally driven attempt to feel some twisted sense of solidarity with his best friend, wanted Killua to hurt just as much, in that moment at least. Killua was well aware of this psychological storm brewing within Gon, and he did all he could to spare him some level of emotional torment. But the entire situation just became way too big for any one child to manage. We're given a glimpse into the weight Killua is under when he breaks down during his encounter with Palm. And like so many moments during this arc, it's a genuinely painful sight. Killua begs Palm to spare Gon the revelation of her capture and transformation into a Chimera ant, as having witnessed the encounter with Pitu, Killua knows far too well how delicate Gon's psychological state currently is. With no other recourse in sight, Killua attempts to emotionally appeal to what he hopes are remnants of Palm's humanity still remaining within her, and it really is hard to watch knowing what Killua knows. Luckily, things play out positively with Palm, as she has managed to retain virtually the entirety of her prior identity, despite her transformation into a Chimera ant. But the glimpse we get into Killua's internal turmoil is really the most significant and, I think, important takeaway from their encounter. Hey guys and gals. Alright, so I wanted to show a little bit of this interview that Togashi conducted in Shonen Jump in like 2015, I think. But anyways, it kind of expands on his thinking, in his approach to writing Gon, and he kind of expands on like his psychology somewhat, and it's really interesting, And I wanted to share it just because I think it kind of ties into what we're talking about in the video, and I've seen a lot of discussion online about, how Gon maybe suffers from some kind of like psychopathy or personality disorder or whatever it may be. And while, he very well may have developed a personality disorder as a result of some of the more traumatic experiences he went through on his journey, I don't think he was written with severe mental illness in mind. I think Gon is first and foremost defined by his father's absence, and yeah, that's always been priority number one for old Gonzo. So, yeah, let's get into that interview. The protagonist, Gon, for example, looks deceptively cute, but has absolutely no hesitation to battle. He is a unique character that can convey a feeling of infinite fearsomeness. At first, I wanted to make Gon a good boy that would dominate the polls for characters you want to have as a son, but as soon as the serialization began, or rather, as soon as I started writing my draft, I felt like that wasn't quite it. A boy who proclaimed that he would abandon his foster mother to become a hunter isn't quite a good son, is he? I started thinking, this is one really crazy kid. But I thought it couldn't be helped that he would behave that way, as he was in turn the son of a father who did indeed abandon his child to become a hunter. To me, he was a natural character. He said that having a crazy kid as protagonist was in line with the story's direction. If I had made my protagonist a right proper lad and drawn a battle manga with it, it would have raised complications when he had to duke it out. That per se would have made for a fun story to write, but I thought that wasn't where I wanted to go with this story. I did not want to alienate my readers who would read for the fights. Thanks to making a crazy kid like Gon the protagonist, I was able to write battles without having to depict moral conflicts within the character. So, a boy who abandons his foster mother, the only source of unconditional love he has ever known from this cruel goddamn world, in order to become a hunter, to find his father, who abandoned him in order to continue being a hunter, is not, moralistically speaking, a right, proper lad. It checks out. Maybe due to his nature, maybe a result of his trauma, but likely a mixture of a unique and highly volatile mental makeup peppered with some childhood abandonment for good measure, which is arguably a less overall contributing factor in this case, but still a hugely important key into understanding this kid. And God, I love him. I love him. It's absolutely worth noting the other reason Togashi went in this unhinged direction with Gon, that being to justify the complete disregard for self-preservation he shows in Battle from the Jump, for the sake of the battle quality too, as Togashi acknowledges. You need an entire video to dive into the commitment to staying consistent within this manga's ever expanding and insanely complex internal logic, which in the case of combat is based around a power system that allows for and establishes restrictions and limitations which allow for just about any power to fly, honestly. Like, it's insane. It's ridiculous that this shit isn't trash. It's tremendously satisfying to watch an artist be so unabashedly inspired by something as fucking cool as Battle Shonen, while adding a level of genuine narrative depth that's rarely seen from projects from really any medium. I'll put Hunter x Hunter up against anything. Flipping the tropes, finding new ways to tell old tales, which in this case is about a boy in search of his father, and eventually so much more than that. Hunter x Hunter as a story very much believes in the substantial role circumstances play in a person's development. Circumstances that can dictate an individual's entire worldview. Circumstances that cause people to destroy others and themselves in the process. These same circumstances allow for beautiful things to happen, like the serendipitous nature of both Gon and Killua simultaneously taking the Hunter exam and meeting one another, which led to a beautiful, albeit imperfect, friendship. Despite the boys' considerable growth and all of the amazing memories they made, Killua's codependency and Gon's selfishness ultimately led to more pain than any child should have to endure. Killua was already a victim of severe physical and mental abuse, literally created to fulfill a need or a familial role. The environment curated for his childhood rewarded the ability to extinguish desire and suppress emotions. Your needs come secondary to the family's or others. The only love Killua knows or understands is transactional. While he was able to overcome much of his family's conditioning and heal, the extreme nature of his relationship with Gon is evidence that Killua is still human and just as influenced by his nurture. Regardless of my criticizing Gon's questionable morality, I don't think he's a monster. Just another victim in a story full of them. Thank Christ for Mito being in Gon's life, acting as a loving, albeit naive, caretaker. But the reality is, the absence of his father left a massive hole in his heart and fire in his stomach. Gon was bound by his own desire and ambition the moment Kite told him the truth about his father, that he was alive and he left for a reason. It doesn't matter to Gon the moral implications of Jing's reason, just that there is one, and that there is a Jing. Having Killua in his life is clearly very important to Gon, like hugely important, but he has been singularly driven since his journey began. Killua tagged along, and I don't believe Gon ever truly valued anything or anyone over his ambition, not even his own life. It sounds harsh, and again, I stress the importance and genuine nature of Killua and Gon's friendship, practically brotherhood, by the end. But give me a scenario where Gon has to choose between, hypothetically, Killua dying and him continuing to be able to pursue his goal, essentially, just like, I don't know. I know it's like not something that would ever be presented in the series, and it shouldn't, because it'd be stupid, but I don't know what Gon would go with. I feel like he might rationalize things in a way where Killua might bite the dust, but God, I still love him. How can you not? Togashi knew exactly what he was doing when writing Gon, and don't be fooled by the doom and gloom. He's a fucking trip, and a thoroughly heartwarming one on many occasions. I would have absolutely loved to have been pals with him when I was a lad. It would have been amazing. Great friend material. It's why Killua falls in love with him, and why people are generally drawn to the magnetism of those who display the same unyielding optimism and positivity that Gon does. I feel the need to throw this section in for the sake of the few odd souls who maybe decided to watch till the very end without having seen the show. First off, sorry about the spoilers. Secondly, I know we spent a lot of time in some rather bleak territory with this video, but I don't want to give anyone the wrong impression. Hunter x Hunter, more often than not, is a fairly standard, albeit seriously well executed shonen manga with a great power system introduced in a way that does wonders for the overall world building, in my opinion. But that's exactly why Hunter x Hunter works as well as it does and genuinely subverts fan expectations without pissing the audience off or insulting their intelligence. It respects your suspension of disbelief and ability to pick up on the presence and determine the relevance of the series' heavier thematic elements and character moments, as well as those characters' hypocrisies and moral inconsistencies, without force feeding the info or patting itself on the back for recognizing that human beings are fucking complicated and varied creatures with the ability to display undeniable acts of altruism in tandem with cold-hearted malice, all while failing to recognize the presence of either quality in their actions. In other words, gone. Thanks for watching.